It is NaPoWriMo, and even though that means National Poetry Writing Month, if there is one thing I have learnt in the last couple of years, it is that reading poetry inspires me to write poetry. So if any of you out there are doing NaPoWriMo this month, make sure you are reading poetry to keep your creative juices all topped up, keep yourself refreshed, because that is what helps me write, is by reading. Hello poetry pals, welcome back to another video. This week I am doing a review of Stephen Lightbound's Only Air as part of my Not a Proper Book Review series, and just to clarify, it means that I am not doing a proper review, not that it is not a proper book. Make sense? Good. Let's get into it. Please ignore the pink hands. I dyed my hair. I don't have gloves. I know it's stupid. Don't at me. Stephen is a poetry pal of mine. Will that influence my review? Yes. Do I think that I'm going to be way too nice? Absolutely not, because this book deserves it. But what him being my friend does mean is that I know a few stories and a few bits and bobs that I'm just gonna share with you as we go. So Stephen Lightbound's Only Air is published by Burning Eye Books. It is a deeply personal collection of poems which explore what it is like to go through a life-changing accident and then to re-exist in a world that is suddenly unfamiliar. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at this book in the same way I have done all of the others, with the same criteria. I've been thinking about the order I do my criteria. I know that, like, people say on the internet you should list the most important things first, but I like to structure my criteria in the way that I encounter a poetry book, which is why I start with aesthetics. It is not to say that aesthetics are the most important thing about a poetry book, but it is the first thing that makes you see it and you're like, oh, I want that on my bookshelf. So, aesthetics for this book. This is the front cover. Hang on, focus on this, focus. This is the front cover. I personally think this is beautiful. Does it say? The cover illustration is by Kate Hazel, and I think that this is stunning. Now, the image of the tree is something that is very important in Stephen's work because his accident involved hitting a tree on a sledge. So this image of the tree is very important, and I can see why he's chosen that to be his front cover. One side is bare and one side has lots of growth, and I just think this cover's really beautiful. Here's my conspiracy theory, slash not a conspiracy theory, but if this is true, I think that's really cute. There are 3 birds here above the tree, and in the book there is a poem called 3 Little Birds, and it is about his partner's tattoo on the bottom of her foot, and it's about how her foot moves across the bed and they, like, their feet nest together, but, like, you know, that. So it's about his partner's tattoo, and this really beautiful image and this really, like, gorgeous poem. And there are 3 birds here, and what I know is after this book was published, or as part of this book being published, Stephen then went and got a tattoo of the 3 little birds from this cover. So are those linked together? Does the tattoo that Stephen have match the tattoo on the feet, which matches this? What does that mean? I'm interested. The only other thing to say about the aesthetics is I don't like the font. I don't like Burning Eye's font. I just like serif fonts when it comes to poetry, okay? Sorry about it. It's not a big deal, but it is to me. Okay, rant over. But the font, like, it's fine. The poetry's good, so who cares? So next up, I'm going to talk about sequencing and structure, and boy, do I have a lot to say about the sequencing and structure of this book, because it's great. This is the contents page, and as you can see, it is divided into 6 sections. I'm here for a sectioned poetry collection. So the sections are called Accident, Stabilising, Sitting Up, Starting Again, setbacks, and going home. What I like about this is obviously those section titles imply that we're going on a journey from the accident to going home. Yeah, so it implies a chronology, but actually each section has poems that are set and are about different times chronologically, from when Stephen was in hospital and the immediate repercussions of the accident to being a grown man and you know, being a wheelchair user and how that works. What I'm trying to say is that the poems over the collection as a whole aren't in chronological order. Instead, they're grouped thematically around each section. So the accident section is all of the shock and the horror of the immediate accident. And that shock and that horror is reoccurs not just immediately after, and not just in the poems that are immediately after, but in later poems as well, when you're dealing with other things and you're just like, yeah. And then like with the stabilizing ones, that's that sort of like getting used to it again, like sort of trying to readjust to what is the life now. And then the sitting up ones are all very much about being in a chair and what that means. The starting again thing is talking about how like life's starting to get going again. And then the setbacks, like when you are recovering from anything, it's never that smooth road. You're never going to be like, okay, well, this is where I'm at now, this is where I end up, and it's just going to be smooth. No, you're going to have these moments, and so I kind of like that the setbacks are in there, because it's never going to be plain sailing. And then the going home is that this is my home in my new life. It's worth saying that you're not going on a chronological journey from accident to going home. You're going to be taken every which way in terms of the timeline of Stephen's life and what's happened. And I like that. I like the thematic journey through it instead. That is personally how I have also been sequencing my collection, so I appreciate that. I know that Stephen has been having a lot of like mentors from people, and personally, like, the structure of this collection is my favourite bit. Like, this, he's worked so hard on it, and you can tell, and it's in the best way. I think the way that this is structured works fantastically. And yeah, so Stephen, I know you're going to watch this, but Stephen, well done on the sequencing and structuring. Those are my favourite. It's also worth saying that each section begins with a page of the title page of the section with a quote underneath it. I think it really helps to like set the scene of what that section's going to be, and it really, yeah, it puts you in the mindset of what to expect. So the one for accident, which is the first section, is judge, jury, executioner. The surgeon speaks a short sentence that starts a life stretch. You'll never walk again. Okay, we know where we're at now. We're situated. Let's talk about the opening poem. The opening poem is called This So-Called Life, Part 2, which is a really interesting thing to call your first poem in your collection a part 2. This poem sets you up to see Stephen's life in 2 parts. One being before the accident and one being after. And that is a really good way of doing it. And part 2 is kind of jarring, but this poem itself is not meant to be comfortable, so I kind of like that. This poem also is unusually for an opening poem. It's quite long. It is in 6 sections across a double page spread like that, and it's numbered, and normally I would say that it is too long for an opening poem, but I think it works. I think it just dumps a whole load of context for us straight in there. It's like, okay, this is what happened. Now the rest of the collection sits on this as a context. The image of these opening lines, very much talking about religion. There's a lot of religious imagery in this opening thing when talking about the accident and the aftermath. And we are also given, we're given the like bare bones on which the rest of the collection sits. We learn in this opening poem that he was 16 when the accident happened. He was 21 when his dad died. And then we've got all of this religious imagery. We're already given a lot of moments of how people are behaving towards him now that he's had the accident. We've sort of been given that. We get the talk about how the England football manager being sacked for saying that that people born with a disability pay for sins in a previous existence. So he's talking about that sort of attitude. We get the image of him being approached by someone with a Bible and saying that, like, if you believe, God will heal you, which is just fucked. Just don't do that. Piece of life, just don't. Even though my instinct says this is a bit long for an opening poem, I think it also works really well. And also partly because you encounter it on a double page, because the section header has taken up that. So it's still all right in front of you, which I like. I'll allow it. But I think this is a great opening poem. So the closing poem is called White. The first time I encountered this poem was actually when Stephen performed as part of Bristol Poetry Festival, the Raise the Bar night. Stephen had a set, and I don't know if he ended on this one. I think maybe he did. I feel like this is a great poem to end on. And the poem is about his honeymoon. When he performed it, we were in an auditorium of nearly 200 people were in that space, and he throughout the whole set had been staring around the auditorium, really bringing us into his story and letting us know, but for this poem he only looked at her. He just stared right at her and performed it just to her, like the rest of us weren't even there. And it was so beautiful, and I just, So this closing poem for me is the perfect way to end this, for this reason, the way he has chosen to line this poem. So I'm not going to read you the poem, I don't want to do that, but there are two lines that are isolated on their own, you can see. And the first single line on its own is what happens next, and then the last line of the entire collection is we happen next. And I think that that is just such a beautiful way to end it. This collection is filled with a lot of emotions and a lot of anger and sadness and confusion, and it's filled with a lot and it's dealing with a lot, but what that final line says is we're going to end on love. Love happens next. After all of those feelings, love happens next, and I love it. And also, low-key Stephen, if your next collection isn't a set of love poems, I'm gonna be real mad, because I feel like the phrase "we happen next" is like a little teaser to what your next collection should be. You better be writing a next collection, and it better be about love. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about my favourite poem, and then I'm going to talk about my least favourite poem. My favourite poem is just the one that I had the most extreme emotional reaction to. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the most technically strong poem out of all of them, but it is my favourite. It's called XL, and it is in the section called Sitting Up. This section is all about being in a wheelchair and the realities of that. And the first sentence is, his hugs came like his t-shirts in double XL. And it's talking about his dad, who is dead. So spoiler alert, of course, the one that I'm going to respond most to is about his dad, because, you know. I think the reason I love this poem is because it's dealing with so many things. It's dealing with like masculinity and what that means to show emotion, and hugs, and I really just love the image of, we learn a fair amount about Stephen's dad throughout all of this, and like this is like the moment where we find out like he's a cuddler, and I'm like, all right, okay, we learned yeah, okay, he's a cuddler, cool. You just get this image, like that image of the Came Like His t-shirts in XXL, you know the type of hug you're getting, it's like, ah! And then the poem like talks about how before the accident he'd actually told his dad like, oh, no, I don't want to cuddle anymore, and that sort of made me sad, because boys and emotions and cuddles should just happen, but yeah. And then he talks about what happens after the accident, and like the realities of what hugging means when you're in a wheelchair. Ugh, this image, okay. Back at my 8-year-old kitchen door frame notch. Oh, we learn a lot throughout there's a recurring, it's not an image, but there is this recurring thing about Stephen's height. We learn that Stephen's like 6'2" higher. Stephen's a tall dude, but like when he's like in his wheelchair, he is like this phrase, back to his 8-year-old kitchen door frame height. Ooh. Basically they start hugging again, but he's like at the height of his stomach, and I just think it's beautiful. The other image that was my favourite was, whilst he clamped me reassuringly into his Benson and Hedges scent. Ooh. Ooh. I know it's weird, but I also find the smell of cigarette smoke really reassuring, and it is definitely because of my dad too. So yeah, this poem's my favourite. I like it. The final lines are just beautiful. It's great. Like, oh, so good. Sorry, I keep making poetry noises instead of actually telling you in proper words what I mean. One of the other things about this poem that's so great is the placement of it. And so when I first read this poem in the context of the... Yes? When I first read this poem in the context of the full collection, I had to put that down and I sobbed for a little while. And then I picked the book up, turned to the next page, and it's called The Woe of Toe. But the phrase, your own toe with a mind of its own, as though it's a pinky with a brain. Comedic genius. I'm just gonna say it. And the way Stephen performs it, it is so funny, and so I think the placement of those two poems together was really good for me as a reader, because I got this really strong emotional connection with this poem, and then instantly got quite a funny moment, even if it's a kind of gross moment as well, because it's talking about losing a toenail. But yeah, so that is my favourite. So my least favourite poem was Should Have Kept Quiet, which is about being on a date and being asked if you've ever felt this way and saying, well, yes, when Alan Shearer came to see me. And it's this story about Alan Shearer coming to visit in hospital, and it's all about what a big fan of Alan Shearer he is, and it is really funny, and I've seen Stephen perform this before, and it is hilarious. I have been crying with laughter when seeing him do this, and he really like brings you in and kind of makes you a fan of football, even though I'm not a fan of football. But for me, this poem is less successful on the page, and it is quite long. It's 3 pages long, and I don't think it was needed. I think it could have been edited. I think it could have been tightened up a little bit. I think the poem itself definitely has a place in here. I just think that it could have done with a bit more editing and a bit more streamlining. Yeah, I always get quite nervous doing the like negative bits of reviews, and it's not partly because I don't want people to think that I hate their books. Like, I really enjoyed this collection. It's just that I feel like I have to give a balanced thing, so I have to talk about the bits that are least successful. So that's why I did it. Please don't hate me. A lot of it is probably because I don't like football. So I just wanted to give another special mention to another poem that made me furious, and I can't believe that this actually happened. It is called A Fiver, an Injured Gazelle, and You, a Tiger. And it is about this woman insisting on trying to give him money when he's at the bus stop, and he's like, no, I've got a job. Fuck off. And she just wouldn't leave him alone. And like the final line is, and confirm the hierarchy between us. Ooh. That one made me so angry. I had to message Stephen. Yeah, so like, just a hint, don't do that. How about that? Just don't. So to wrap it up, in conclusion, this is a brilliant collection. I know that Stephen worked really hard and had a lot of people mentoring him, and had a lot of like performance mentoring, but also on this collection, and it shows. It's so good, and it is really beautiful. It is really heart-wrenching. It's funny, and it makes me angry. It feels like a privilege to be let in and told this story in such, and it is told so well, and I love it. I actually love it. So if you are in Bristol and you're a good friend of mine and you would like to borrow this, of course you can. Although I would encourage you to go and buy it. And Stephen, thank you for writing this, and thank you for sharing your story with the world, because it needs to be told, and I really enjoy it. Buy his book. So that is it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a like on this video, and please subscribe. I am doing weekly-ish videos for the whole year, and yeah, I'd really appreciate your subscribe. No tea today, only water.